Behind the glamorous headlines and red carpet photos lie stories that Hollywood would rather forget. In this video, we're uncovering 6 of the worst celebrity fatalities caused by animals ever recorded. And every single one ended in absolute horror. It was October 5th, 2003, in Katmai National Park, Alaska. At the edge of a dense alder thicket, a small camp was situated directly on a well-used bear trail, its presence a quiet anomaly in the vast, indifferent wilderness. Timothy Treadwell, 46, was a self-styled bear protector who had spent the previous 13 summers in Katmai. A charismatic and fervent environmentalist, he believed he had forged a unique, peaceful bond with the coastal brown bears, founding a non-profit called Grizzly People. He named the bears, talked to them, and often positioned himself within a few feet of them, operating on the conviction that his love and non-threatening demeanor provided a protective shield. His partner, Amy Huguenard, 37, was a physician's assistant from Colorado. She was far less public than Treadwell and, according to his own video diaries, was more cautious and fearful of the animals, her scientific background likely clashing with his unsanctioned methods. They were at the end of their seasonal stay, scheduled for a pilot to retrieve them the following day. Their fieldwork involved living for weeks in the remote backcountry with minimal standard protection. Treadwell eschewed firearms, relying instead on pepper spray. He used a handheld video camera to document his interactions, creating a vast library of footage that showed him progressively crossing the boundary between observer and participant. The scientific and National Park Service communities heavily criticized his methods, arguing that he was dangerously habituating the bears to human presence, eroding their natural wariness and creating a predictable risk for both himself and any future humans the bears might encounter. That season, Treadwell and Huguenard had remained in the park later than usual, venturing into the hyperphagic period when bears are intensely feeding and are most aggressive and unpredictable. In his final video diary, Treadwell expressed unease about a specific bear he did not recognize, describing it as a big bear that was thin and hungry. This bear, later identified by wildlife officials as Bear 141, represented the precise danger Park Service protocols are designed to mitigate: an unknown, potentially food-stressed predator. Despite this observation and Huguenard's documented apprehension, they did not relocate their camp from the bear trail. On the afternoon of October 5th, the situation unraveled. The only record was an audio recording recovered from a video camera inside their tent, its lens cap still on. The tape captured 6 minutes of the incident. It began with Treadwell outside the tent, yelling that he was getting killed out there as the sounds of a struggle erupted. Huguenard exited the tent and Treadwell screamed for her to get away. She remained, hitting the bear with a saucepan in a futile defense. Her desperate cries urged him to play dead. And then, in a moment of terrible confusion, she screamed at him to fight back, their catastrophic and conflicting strategies proving useless against an overwhelming force. The mauling was intense and grounded in brutal physicality. The audio recorded Treadwell's screams, the bear's deep-throated growls, and the thrashing sounds of the attack. His screams eventually faded. The audio confirms that Amy Huguenard was also attacked and killed during this prolonged incident. Her screams are audible on the recording. The bear, Bear 141, did not leave, but stayed with the bodies, caching and guarding them as a food source. It returned to the site throughout the night and the next morning. While the exact timeline is debated, the audio evidence confirms she was killed by the bear during the attack, likely after Treadwell was mortally wounded. The scheduled air taxi pilot, Willie Fulton, discovered the scene on October 6th. Flying over the camp, he saw a bear scavenging a human body and the campsite in disarray. He immediately flew to a nearby lodge to alert authorities. Due to the extreme remoteness and the active predatory bear at the site, a team of park rangers and a state trooper could not secure the area until October 7th. In the aftermath, park rangers tracked and euthanized Bear 141 and a second larger bear that had begun scavenging the remains. The event became the basis for the documentary Grizzly Man. which featured Treadwell's own footage. The incident stands as a factual, tragic warning on the consequences of anthropomorphizing apex predators and disregarding the fundamental protocols of wilderness safety. It was October 27, 2009, on the Skyline Trail in Cape Breton Highlands National Park. Other hikers had already reported unnerving encounters with coyotes that afternoon, animals that did not retreat at the sound of human voices. Taylor Mitchell, 19, was an award-nominated folk singer-songwriter on her first solo tour of Eastern Canada. A rising star in the Canadian folk scene, she was also an experienced and enthusiastic backpacker. Confident in her outdoor skills, her decision to hike the trail alone was that of a competent outdoor enthusiast seeking solitude and inspiration in a stunning, well-traveled national park. She carried standard day hiking gear, prepared for the physical demands of the coastal trail, but operating under the common and historically valid assumption that coyotes pose little more than a nuisance risk. The coyotes in this region are eastern coyotes, a distinct subspecies that is typically larger and more robust than its western counterpart due to historical interbreeding with eastern wolves. While coyote attacks on adults are exceptionally rare, the specific animals reported on the trail that day were displaying atypical and escalating aggression. They had been seen following hikers closely, refusing to be deterred by shouting or thrown objects. This behavior represented a significant departure from normal coyote wariness, creating a hazardous situation that standard hazing techniques, which Mitchell would have reasonably relied upon, had already proven ineffective against these particular predators that day. Mitchell was hiking alone when at least 2 of these coyotes set upon her. The attack was not a single lunge, but a swift, coordinated, and sustained assault. The coyotes, operating with a predatory efficiency, targeted her limbs and torso, their sharp teeth tearing at her clothes and flesh as she fought back. Her screams for help, raw, piercing cries of terror and pain, cut through the calm trail atmosphere, echoing across the plateau. A couple, who were hiking nearby, heard the horrific sounds and ran toward the commotion. They arrived to witness a scene of sudden, brutal violence. The coyotes were actively mauling Mitchell on the trail, dragging and shaking her body with a force that belied their size. The ground was scuffed and stained, and the animals' focus was absolute, their attack relentless and grounded in a primal drive to subdue their prey. The couple shouted and waved their arms, successfully driving the animals away from Mitchell temporarily. They reached her side, attempting to provide aid. However, the coyotes did not flee. They circled back with persistent aggression, continuing their assault even with the couple present. The Therios had to repeatedly fight the animals off, their efforts proving insufficient to stop the determined attack on the severely injured woman. The coyotes' focus on their prey overrode any fear of the human intervention. One of the hikers used a cell phone to call 911. Park wardens and paramedics were dispatched immediately, but the remote trail access meant it took approximately 30 minutes for paramedics to arrive by all-terrain vehicle. Mitchell was conscious and able to speak when they first reached her and began emergency care. Taylor Mitchell was airlifted to a hospital in Halifax, but succumbed to her severe injuries later that evening. Her death was the first recorded fatal coyote attack on a healthy adult in North American history. Park officials tracked down and killed 2 coyotes believed responsible. Necropsies found the animals were not rabid, but human food and packaging material in one animal's stomach provided clear evidence of habituation due to being fed by people, a fatal loss of natural fear. It was April 22, 2008, at the Predators in Action compound Bear Lake in the San Bernardino Mountains. Inside a chain-link enclosure, a routine was about to unfold. Stephen Miller, a 39-year-old professional animal trainer and stuntman, was a respected figure in the insular world of Hollywood animal handling. His career was built on working with the most powerful creatures on set, including big cats and bears, for major films like Gladiator and Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. On that day, Miller was working with Rocky, a grizzly bear he had raised from a cub and had trained for nearly a decade. Rocky weighed approximately 700 pounds and stood over 7 feet tall on his hind legs. His kind possesses a bite force capable of crushing bone and claws, designed for digging and tearing. Despite this, Rocky was considered a model bear by the trainers, predictable and calm after thousands of hours of structured interaction. The assignment was a routine training session for a promotional video for the facility, a standard task that involved directing the bear through simple actions, likely walking across the enclosure on cue. Miller entered the main enclosure with Rocky. 2 other trainers remained positioned outside the primary fence, a standard safety practice. Miller was directing the bear, using established commands to guide its movement for the camera setup. There was no audible growl, no recognizable sign of agitation or threat from the animal. The bear was simply there, a massive, familiar presence, and then it was not. In an instant, without the warning signals a human might recognize, Rocky's demeanor shifted. The animal turned on Miller, its focus shifting from the trained task to the man. The attack was immediate and overwhelming. The initial force of the bear knocked Miller to the ground, and the animal bit him at least once on his upper right torso. According to the Ventura County Coroner's report, this single bite resulted in the specific, fatal injuries. It fractured Miller's ribs and severed his subclavian artery, a major blood vessel located just beneath the collarbone. This injury causes rapid, massive, and catastrophic internal bleeding. The trainers outside the enclosure reacted instantly. One of them deployed bear spray, which caused the bear to immediately stop its attack and retreat from Miller's body. However, the cessation of the mauling came too late. The damage from the single bite was already fatal. The trainers called 911. Paramedics and sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes, but they had to wait for the bear to be secured before entering. By the time they could reach Miller, he had succumbed to his injuries. Stephen Miller was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was exsanguination from the laceration of the subclavian artery. The bear, Rocky, was not euthanized. The owners and investigators concluded the attack was an unpredictable act by a wild animal. The incident underscored the devastating efficiency of an apex predator, where a single brief attack can have fatal consequences. It was June 25, 1912, near Fort Archambault in the French Congo. The dense thorn bush and tall elephant grass created a landscape of limited visibility, where sounds were muffled and an animal could remain unseen until it was dangerously close. Hubert Latham, age 29, was a celebrated figure in early aviation, known for an unflappable and almost indifferent courage. He was the first to attempt a cross-channel flight in an airplane in 1909, a daring competitor for the Daily Mail prize, and a man who thrived on calculated risk. His motivation in both aviation and big game hunting was a deep-seated desire to master new frontiers, whether mechanical or natural. Latham was an expert sportsman, familiar with the technical demands of hunting dangerous game. This included understanding wind direction to mask his scent, identifying spoor, and knowing the anatomy of his quarry for a clean kill. His gear was a high-caliber rifle, appropriate for stopping large charging animals, but its utility depended on having the time and space to aim and fire. The specific challenge that day was tracking a wounded African buffalo. Latham had already fired at one, and the animal had fled into the thick brush. An African buffalo is not a creature that flees to escape. It is known for circling back and ambushing its pursuers. A mature bull can weigh over 1,500 pounds with a massive horn boss. It is considered one of the most dangerous game animals in Africa, particularly when injured, as its aggression becomes unpredictable and its charges are persistent. Latham, accompanied by a group of native guides, began to follow the blood trail left by the wounded bull. They moved cautiously into the dense vegetation, where the visibility dropped to just a few feet. The tall grass and thicket created a labyrinth, obscuring any clear line of sight. The guides, understanding the peril of a cornered buffalo, would have been acutely aware of every snapped twig and rustle in the grass. The tracking party was committed to the pursuit, a standard but hazardous practice, pushing deeper into the buffalo's chosen terrain. The wounded animal had not gone far. It used the environment to its advantage, concealing itself completely in the dense cover. There was no loud bellow or dramatic warning. The attack was a sudden, explosive charge from close range through the thicket. The buffalo covered the short distance in seconds, its head lowered. While the exact reason is not specified in contemporary accounts, Latham was unable to fire a second shot. His rifle may have been a single-shot model, or more likely, the suddenness of the charge simply did not allow him time to cycle the bolt action for another round. The bull's primary horn struck Latham in the thigh, a common target in a buffalo's upward-thrusting gore. The horn tore through muscle and tissue and, most critically, severed his femoral artery. The force of the impact was immense, lifting him and inflicting catastrophic internal injuries. The guides, present but typically armed with less powerful weapons than the primary hunter, were unable to intervene effectively against the speed and fury of the charge. The entire event was over in moments, leaving Latham mortally wounded on the ground amidst the trampled grass. Hubert Latham died from his wounds at the scene. The specific cause of death was exsanguination, resulting from the severing of the femoral artery. The remote location and the limited medical capabilities of 1912 colonial Africa made any prospect of survival impossible, as such an injury requires immediate, advanced surgical intervention to have any chance of survival. Contemporary reports accepted the buffalo attack as the official cause, but French officers who later examined his remains noted a head injury they believed inconsistent with a gore, and persistent rumors suggested he may have been murdered by his porters for his rifles. His death was reported internationally, shocking the aviation and sporting communities. He was remembered as a pioneer whose life was ended by the same formidable dangers he had always sought to confront. It was August 4th, 1993, on John Pickard's family farm in Las Casas, Tennessee. The only sounds were the distant movements of family members settling into a late afternoon picnic near the main house, a quiet contrast to the open field where a dairy bull stood grazing, its placid demeanor belying the inherent power contained within its bulk. John Pickard, an 80-year-old American actor, was a familiar face on American television, best known for his roles in True Grit and Boots and Saddles, which often showcased his affinity for working with animals. His career was built on a foundation of physical, earnest performances. The environment that afternoon was not a production set, but his own property, where he had been tending to a bull rented for short-term breeding purposes. The animal had been selected based on assurances of calm temperament, and Pickard, comfortable around livestock, handled routine tasks himself when the farm was quiet. That day, Pickard had entered the field to check the bull's position before letting younger relatives wander closer to the paddock area. He moved with casual familiarity, expecting the animal to remain indifferent. No external warnings or weather factors were noted. The primary variable was the bull's response to a person approaching on foot during a routine check. For several moments, the bull simply observed him. Then, its posture shifted. An adjustment in weight, a forward lean, the kind of subtle behavioral change experienced stock handlers would recognize as attention turning into agitation. Pickard may not have realized the shift quickly enough in the open, uneven field. The animal began to move, not with idle curiosity, but with intent, its heavy hooves cutting shallow furrows into the ground. He hesitated rather than retreating immediately, likely believing he could redirect the animal's attention or back away slowly. But the bull accelerated, closing the distance with surprising speed for its size. There was no time for evasive action. The animal lowered its head and drove forward, the force of the impact a violent, upward thrust that lifted Pickard entirely off his feet. He landed hard as the bull continued its attack, its horns goring him with repeated motions. The assault produced catastrophic crushing and penetrating trauma to his chest, causing severe internal injuries. Relatives at the picnic area shouted for help, the quiet afternoon ruptured by the sudden violence unfolding in the field. Emergency services were called immediately, with responders arriving from Rutherford County. Despite rapid dispatch, the injuries were fatal before advanced care could be applied. John Pickard was pronounced dead at the scene, the extent of trauma leaving no viable medical intervention. A formal inquest followed, producing a verdict of accidental death. The investigation concluded that the attack resulted from the bull's sudden, instinctive reaction during routine handling rather than any provocation or procedural error. The tragedy became a somber reminder of the inherent dangers involved in working with large livestock, even for those with lifelong familiarity. It was January 26, 2001, in the hallway of 2398 Pacific Avenue, a well-maintained apartment building in San Francisco's Pacific Heights, a marked contrast to the tension that had been quietly building among residents for weeks, centered on the two large dogs. Diane Whipple, 33, was a world-class athlete and the head coach of the women's lacrosse team at St. Mary's College of California. A former college lacrosse star, she was known for her vitality, competitive spirit, and a fundamental kindness that endeared her to her players and friends. She lived with her partner, Sharon Smith, building a life in the city. Her neighbors, attorneys Marjorie Knoller and Robert Noel, kept 2 Presa Canario dogs in their apartment, Bane and Hera. The dogs had a documented history of aggression within the building. They had previously threatened other residents, and Knoller and Noel were often seen struggling to control them on leashes. On that day, Whipple was returning from grocery shopping. She was unloading her bags at her apartment door. At that moment, Marjorie Knoller returned with Bane on a leash, while Hera remained inside the apartment. The narrow hallway, a confined space with limited avenues for escape, became the site of the impending disaster. Knoller was physically unable to restrain the powerful animals. Bane, the 140-pound male, broke free and immediately lunged at Whipple. The attack was not a single bite, but a sustained, ferocious assault. The dog's weight and power drove her to the floor. Knoller reportedly tried to pull Bane off, but was ineffective. She later claimed to have placed her body over Whipple's, a statement that was heavily disputed by the prosecution at trial, which argued her efforts were grossly negligent and failed to stop the attack. The mauling continued, unabated. The second dog, Hera, came through the open apartment doorway and joined the attack. And while forensic evidence indicated she primarily mauled Whipple's clothing and limbs, she was an active participant in the sustained assault. The assault lasted for nearly 10 minutes in the enclosed hallway. Whipple suffered over 77 distinct wounds. The most severe injuries were lacerations to her throat, which severed her jugular vein and crushed her larynx, leading to fatal blood loss. The violence was so extreme that her clothing was shredded. A building janitor and other neighbors heard the screams and the sounds of the struggle, calling 911. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes. They used pepper spray to subdue the dogs and gain access. Diane Whipple was pronounced dead at the hospital. The coroner later stated it was the most severe mauling he had ever witnessed. The legal aftermath was extensive. Marjorie Knoller was initially convicted of second-degree murder, later reduced to involuntary manslaughter. Robert Noel was also convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Sharon Smith's wrongful death lawsuit set a crucial legal precedent, establishing the right of a same-sex partner to sue for wrongful death in California. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.